For the next presentator to present for us, who is Lorenzo Marinucci, sorry about my pronunciation, Lorenzo, on Center's Place, Basho in an Atmospheric Perspective.
Thank you. Okay, so it's a real pleasure for me to be here today and have a chance to speak. This is also the very end of my one-year stay at Kyoto as a Canon Fellow with a project on olfaction and Japanese thought, and I lived Tuesday and arrived in Japan just last March, 3 days before the border shut down. While stressful, there was a very meaningful stuff for this year of research. Since my dangerous trip, the physical but not emotional distance from Italy, the need to relearn and negotiate common spaces of our being, feeling, breathing together forced me to deeply think about what plays in atmosphere are and how the sensual self-consciousness, the recalled scent of Nioi, plays a subtle, crucial role in our experience of self, culture, human, and non-human. So, most people here are much better acquainted than I with Nishida's philosophy, and my understanding of Basho might be too simplistic. I will therefore try to approach the notion of Basho through that of atmosphere. Okay. As developed by Hermann Schmitz, Gunnar Böhme, Hubertus Stellenbach. An atmosphere is a sensorial and affective quality widespread in space, the particular tone that determines the way one experiences her surrounding. So Schmidt's paradigm is an attempt of turning the European canon on its head, rejecting the psychologistic, reductionistic, introjectionist model typical of European philosophy, and grasp existence starting not from subject-object or substance-accident relationships, but from hard Dinge, such as a gust of wind, flash of pain. And in order to approach place and atmosphere together, I would like to think about a specific phenomenon, scent. I will try to understand if there's a place for scent in Nishida's work, and if scent itself can be felt and understood as a place. And scent has a very unfortunate standing in European thought. So it's a half-formed reality, close to the body but hard to grasp linguistically and theoretically, and the core values and metaphors of European philosophy centered on sight. Scent has become rejected and equally desired as a symbol of what is other from the European subject: the bodily, the formless, the impermanent, the animal, the feminine, the oriental, the poor, and so on. And yet, since we all breathe, by breathing we smell. So we live immersed in an invisible, unstable, mostly non-thematic smellscape or all flow. Scent is spatially anomalous. Normally we assume to be living in a three-dimensional space in which we can distinguish between inside and outside, far and near, but scent is an absolute here. It never happens elsewhere. And many languages, including English and Japanese, construct scent impersonally. It smells. Es riecht. Nioi ga suru. It is still debated how well intentionality applies to scents, and rather than the object before a subject, the scent is always already within myself, in the never visible darkness of my body, but also something floating around, belonging to the world, often an anchor to any specific substance, jizai. Scents are ways in which my consciousness is outside of my somatic body, inviting into something that is more than myself, but never becomes an object. There's no objective three-dimensional coordinate for scent, just a relative, unstable couple strong wick. It is unidimensional, an absolute place. And scent also defies a linear understanding of time. Just as scent is always here, it can only be now, but this now has the endless metaphysical depth of vertical time. We have no voluntary memory of scent, but rather they return as living totalities. If this sounds mystical or abstract to you, please try Kodo once to appreciate the shocking incapability of recalling scents with our usual memory and the emotive force of their resurfacing. This atmospheric scent consciousness is very well represented in Japanese culture. Scent is treated as a paradigm of aesthetic experience in waka, in Basho's haiku, Zami's no theater, tea ceremony, Kodo, as essential transcendence is Buddhism. We can say that Japanese aesthetics typically tries to grab existence as an effective, embodied unfolding of co-implied atmospheres rather than as a subject facing objects. So we can find this paradigm in Watsuji, Nishitani, Kuki, but what about Nishida? Because at first this philosophy seems very far from this olfactory paradigm, and James Heising in his essay Nishida's deodorized Basho and the scent of Zeami's flower wants to draw attention to Nishida's bias for spatial and visual metaphors and to the disembodiment of interpersonal communication that resulted. And Heising laments the preference for space and sight imagery. which keeps Nishida's logic high abstract. And and this abstraction means that the closer one gets to what Nishida calls reality, the more ordinary experiences seem to fade away. And this seems to disinfect reality of its moral dimension and deodorize the scent of the human. But if we say that something is disinfected or deodorized, does it not mean that some kind of scent originally belongs to it? The scent is something that should always be there, an essential part of it. And this is, after all, the paradox of deodorization, the way we try to forget we're animals. The word anosmia became dramatically known 1 year ago as a common symptom of COVID, and talking to several friends in Europe who got infected and were living through this experience, they all mentioned to me a sense of discomforting emotional detachment, of being not present in one's surroundings and to oneself, to have no more a place. And on one newspaper article I read, without smell, I did not just lose my appreciation for detail, but the word, life itself assumes something closer to the mediated, low-stakes cost of a Zoom call. So, hello to everybody following us online. The encounter between human and non-human, its affective element, needs a moodful, fragrant place to happen, a place in which sensation and self-consciousness are held together by an affective unity that is never any positive being, an empty space, ku, that is not other from central, kala, shiki. So, Nishida and the culture of emotion, and because can we find some discussion of this primary affective radiance in Nishida? I found two interesting leads. The first one is we say classical culture forms of East and West from a metaphysical perspective standpoint, which I discovered in Professor Hoara's Japanese aspects of Nishida's Basho. In this essay, Nishida tried to draw a schematic comparison of the fundamental metaphysical perspectives, so contrasting them, starting from their attitude towards being, u, and non-being, mu. So while Greek culture was visual, oriented towards eternal forms, the Japanese one is characterized by its emotional attunement to formlessness. So someone might think of emotion, says Nishida, as something internal, opposed to the exterior, and thus conceive it as something personal. But personhood is rational. Emotion is impersonal. Actually, in emotion, there is no thing such as inside or outside. It is there that we can feel something like mono no aware, the feeling of things. So, emotion is shapeless, neither inside nor outside, impersonal, and obviously this traits to coincide with the phenomenology of sense and atmosphere I was trying to sketch. Moreover, for Nishida, this particular fusion has a particular connection to nonlinear time. The Japanese expression of emotion is, according to Nishida, a negation of time at the bottom of time. And this is why short poetry has a special standing in discussing it. So in Tankani Tsuite, from 1 year before, Nishida said, there is a meaning of life that we can express only through the form of short poetry. Grasping life in the form of short poetry is grasping life from the core of present, seeing it from the single point of an instant. To look immediately into the present, genzai ni sokushite, to act immediately into the present. It's a distinctive trait of us Japanese. Despite its great stress on the philosophical power of poetry, poems are not abundant in Nishida's work, but at the end of 1934 essay, he quotes a famous tanka by Motori Norinaga. So, that's the passage in which he's discussing the living form of an absolute present. What can be really thought as self-determination of nothingness, as affirmation of an absolute negation, must be something endlessly moving. This present must be something in endless motion. It is mountain cherries glowing in the morning sun. The true instant must be something that intersects eternity. So, the real self-determination of nothingness as an eternally moving instant is a centered place. Nishida here is quoting that very famous work of Motori Norinaga. If someone asked me, what is the essence of Yamato, Shikishima Island? Mountain cherries glowing in the morning sun. And so Norinaga is getting this hypothetical question from somebody about who and where he is. And I don't need to explain how crucial and problematic such a question about national identities was for Norinaga's Kokugaku in Nishida's 30s, even today. And yet, as the self reflects itself into itself, as we become self-conscious, the question of the who and of the where are asked and answered together. Norinaga's answer is not, though, a judgment. So, I am Norinaga, I am Japanese, the spirit of Japan is X. but an emotive gesture, kana, a nod outside the window, that does not point at specific objects, but at the synesthetic atmospheric nioi enveloping and disclosing them. As you can see here, the translation for the verb nio is not simply olfactory. Sakura is not a very perfumed flower, but what kind of perfume, if any, is Norinaga referring to? In using nioi, Norinaga is going back to the oldest meaning of this verb, quite rare by the Edo period. When Basho is talking about nioi, he's talking about perfumes, but prevalent in older anthologies, especially in the Mayoshu, because nio referred to a synesthetic style of perception, which included color and perfume as a whole, as an enveloping and emotionally charged atmosphere. So, to a field in which sight and olfaction couldn't possibly be divided. Not an event unfolding in a neatly distinct, objectified word, but one arising in the chaotic word that comes before such a division. Is the joy of scent the joy of being enveloped by the word, the joy of primordial unity? And this fusion is not an unclarity of perception, a numbness, says Tada. On the contrary, we can say that perception of old Japanese was actually keener than that of us moderns, because this emotive central consciousness was so strong that the ancient Japanese felt the need of creating a new character for Nio. So Nio is a kokoji, a character made in Japan, and Norinaga knew it. Let us think for a second this Nioi as a place, a self-determination of nothingness. Somebody could say, here I am, I'm in a field, I'm in Japan, in March, morning, I see a tree of sakura. It has flowers, the flowers are pink, the flowers have a certain scent, but here the original unity and dynamic instantaneity of the scent place has been intellectualized, artificially divided. Things appear originally within an atmosphere, an aura, and it is in this embodied primary dimension, prior to the division in the usual five senses, that emotion abides. And Nishida too has been keenly interested in this synesthetic perception. So he was writing already in 1920 in Ishiki no Mondai. Affective feeling can be described as a unity underlying various intellectual forces. It can be considered as an a priori of an a priori. That's such a strong expression. And when Baudelaire claims le parfum, colère et le sens répondant, the fusion of sense qualities which he refers must be accomplished on the basis of affective feeling. So, what does really happen then when we find ourselves in such a place of perfume? Translating Norinaga's work, I've used the word essence. Because in philosophy, the word essence, essentia, usually belongs to the logic of substance and predicates. And yet, from the late Middle Ages, in alchemical context, essence also came to be understood as something that was the most intimate element of a being, and also going beyond it, surrounded as perfume. So, we can say the innermost is outside. Let's just say, for instance, that we have a wooden scent. It is simply a scent coming from wood, or a scent that contains wood as an image, which brings in it woodenness without being wood itself as a present being. Here the subject is within the predicate. And that's the exact formulation of Nishida's first Basho. As we say that the scent of a rose is the essence of the rose, aren't we saying that the scent is something that's infinitely predicate but not a subject? And this is why I believe language fails to properly affirm this perfume is X and has to rely on metaphors and metonymia. So, 1 minute. Okay, I'm there. What happens as a rose, a stick of incense, the branch of the plum cease to be a positive determined being, a U, but are instead sublimated, Seika, as a multimodal and emotionally charged predictive play of eternal now, as a scent. And I found a surprising description of essence and place in Heidegger, in Introduction to Metaphysics. So over there on the other side of the street stands the high school building. Where now is the being of this high school? It is, after all. One can, as it were, smell the being of such buildings. And often after decades, one still has the scent in one's nose. On the other, this scent is hovering around somewhere. And so, Heidegger's school, Norinaga's Nioi, our Nanzenji, are all places, self-determined of a self-consciousness, whole, full of emotion. And I'm sure I'm just scratching the surface of a much more complex problem, and I will need to keep reading Nishida, and yet trying to approach the deodorized notion of Basho, the way we are in place in scent, as a connection between human consciousness and the primordial atmospheric emotions surrounding us, is proving as an exceptionally challenge. Thank you.
Wow. See, CY is asking to Lorenzo. How about Nioi or smell, which is not present at all? Oh my God.
Which is not?
How about the Nioi or smell, which is not present? Present.
Okay.
Present.
So,
Not present now, じゃなくて、気持ちよい。
okay, yeah.
Present.
So, yeah, no, I mean, plus Nioi is not always pleasant smell, and that's stinks are a very important part, because like to be in a deodorized world means to refuse this kind of negativity. So like decomposition is basically the breaking of a solid body, which becomes like most of the unpleasant smells are smell coming from bacteria. So like from like colonies that are destroying what is present as a thing and making like literally like making it back to a general field. And we are afraid. So when I said it was about Basho as human and non-human, but for instance like animality, in like the reason why like especially Europe and especially late modernity and especially capitalism has a terrorized relationship with human smells is because a body has to be a closed, self-contained identity, and how much so like our animality and our sexual being, for instance, is about the breaking of boundaries. So that, for instance, Iki as well is a kind of like loosening through tension of one's distinct like boundaries as a bodily being. There's an essay about perfume in Iki no Kozo, which is another of its core metaphors. So yes, we are afraid of things we hate. Like we like really can't say that smell is an antisocial sense because we cannot decide not to scent, and so it's always violent. But this is a healthy violent, like it's an animal violent. Freud said that basically civilization is trying to repress, trying to go beyond the animality of scent. So joy and fear are like very tightly bound together. Like scent is the non-human element staying within human consciousness. And so unpleasantness has to be also embraced, I think. It's like mujo as well.